Chapter 191 Forging a Real Mana Weapon by Hydesgrain. Jason looked at Dalir visibly confused, after reading the title of the file he received, not knowing why his masters gave him such a rare technique. If his knowledge was not completely wrong or forged, only the highest authorities within the army, big families, their offsprings, and other individuals should have the ability to obtain a concealment technique. Humans at the Magus and the ongoing ranks were able to conceal their mana fluctuations to a certain degree, however, the disguise was shallow and others would still be able to perceive the rank roughly, if one wanted to know it. But a concealment technique was somewhat different. As long as someone a few ranks higher than him wouldn't try to figure out his exact mana core rank, Jason would be able to make sure that nobody would be able to read his mana core rank, with a few particular exceptions like he himself was, which could have positive and negative results. On one side, he wouldn't be underestimated anymore because of his low mana core rank, while on the other side, the high amplification he received from his soul world and the baptism would be disguised. However, Jason was confused why exactly Dalir and Shane gave him such a technique, because with him practicing this technique, he would indirectly tell everyone that there was someone backing him up. With this, Shane and Dalir's existence couldn't be hidden forever, and it was only a matter of time until Jason had to reveal everything. Was the current use of the concealment technique really large enough to risk something as important as Shane and Dalir's existence to the whole world? Jason wasn't sure about that, and Dalir sensed his hesitation and insecurity about the technique he received as she could faintly understand his train of thoughts. Don't think too much about it, Jason. We don't have to reveal ourselves directly, and we didn't plan to hide forever in the first place. More important to us, however, is your survival, and we think this concealment technique might help you out if you were to be separated from your team, which could happen, even if it's unlikely. In the end, only the possibility of someone backing you will be exposed, and if the worst case happens with someone forcing you to reveal who gave you the concealment technique, you can also lie. Chuckling slightly to lift the tension around Jason, he stared at her weirdly. Lying? Like what? Saying someone else gave me the technique until someone finds out the truth, he said jokingly, as Dalir nodded her head. Exactly. If someone were to force you to tell who gave you the concealment technique, just tell them old Drake or maybe even your teacher Tilgrail gave it to you. It doesn't really matter as long as your opponent believes you. In the end, I doubt that anyone will ask you about the origin of your technique and just see you as a powerful opponent from a big family or ancient clan. Furthermore, the equipment we already gave you is enough reason for others to think that you're backed by someone. Nodding slightly, Jason found her reasoning somewhat logical, yet completely off. However, it was probably not wrong that normal youths would ask him about who supports him because he could just ignore them, while only big families had to be taken care of extremely carefully. He was still unsure whether or not he would practice this technique for now, because his expedition team was unlikely to possess a concealment technique, while their mana fluctuations were much more distinct than his, attracting beasts. Even if others possessed a concealment technique, his innate mana fluctuations were already below average with his mana core rank at the 3rd adept rank. As such, he wouldn't be hunted by any kind of high-ranked beasts, because they instinctively only hunted beasts with strong mana fluctuations instead of someone with weak fluctuations like he currently had, with the sole exception being starving beasts. They stopped talking about the concealment technique as they entered the forging room, where Shane was already impatiently waiting for them. Without wasting any time, Shane threw a large jade iron ore towards him, while instructing him to perfectly cleanse it, while maintaining the same temperature. Jason only glanced at the jade iron ore in front of him, and his mana eyes immediately told him that it was a very lively and precious piece because the mana veins within seemed to be alive, squirming around like chained worms. From the mana conductivity the single large jade iron ore had, Jason would already have more than enough to forge the 2 daggers he made secretly, but he didn't say anything at all, as he started with his task. Perfectly purifying a jade iron bar was like child's play to him. When he ignited his black origin flame in one hand before starting the oxidation process, he was already more than a little familiar with it. Only half an hour passed, when he finished his perfect purifying, as a crudely shaped jade iron bar could be seen in front of him, shining in a green-reddish light due to the heat within. Jason was told to maintain the heat, as he turned around to Shane in order to figure out what he should do next. Once Shane noticed that Jason was already done with his task, he took out a silver shining bar from the smithy which shone as if stars were embedded into it. "Give me the jade iron bar, now," Shane ordered him, as his mana enveloped the jade iron bar, causing it to levitate before it floated towards him. "Heat up your flame by 50 degrees Celsius and place it below the flame I extinguished. Ignite a second flame and heat it up to 2000 degrees Celsius if possible. Try to maintain the flame as long as possible. Dahlia, please take out mana stones for Jason to replenish his mana pool, so he can supply the origin flame longer," Shane ordered, and Dahlia wanted to say that she could use her own origin flame when she remembered that everything Jason learned right now would help his future growth. As such, she remained silent, while taking out a bunch of head-sized grade 1 mana stones. Jason felt that his mana consumption increased by a large margin because he had never increased his flame to 2000 degrees Celsius, and doing so now was extremely taxing. Unfortunately, his master told him to maintain this astronomical heat, as he forced his whole potential out of him, while maintaining a low heat flame subconsciously. Passively replenishing his mana from his sub-area was helpful, but Jason was additionally forced to loosen up several mana threads from the mana stones, before he lead them into his body, while circulating it completely through his mana channels in order to prevent overdrafting his mana due to his high consumption. Jason didn't even have much time to care what Shane was doing, and he could only see from a side glance that the large bars within his master's hand decreased in size as hitting on them, while slowly merging them together, creating an alloy. Suddenly he remembered a certain alloy made out of a silver-colored ore. He merged a comatite bar with the jade iron. "Won't this create jadeite?" he asked himself inside his mind while maintaining the head of both flames at the same time. Jadeite was considered one of the best grade 1 alloys due to its extremely high mana conductivity, which allowed astronomical amounts of mana to flow through it unhindered. Adding that both bars they used were perfectly purified, Jason was sure that the weapons produced out of this particular jadeite bar in front of him would have to be extraordinary. After Shane finished the merging process smoothly as if he had done so thousands of times, Jason was allowed to extinguish one flame. Jason was told to maintain his flame, after increasing its temperature before Shane began the shaping process after he divided the jadeite alloy into 2 equal parts. Their size decreased by more than 50%. Even after they were fully merged, the alloy was barely enough in order to forge 2 daggers for Jason, which was more than enough. Dahlia leaned down to Jason, who was completely exhausted, as she held a potion in her hand. "Take it. Afterward you can take a good look at what exactly Shane is doing. You'll have to do the same in the future if you want to forge real mana weapons." Chapter 192 Viridi by Hydesgrain. Gulping down the potion Dahlia handed him, Jason felt much more energetic than before. Stepping back, Artemis flapped her wings in order to ascend into the air, only to land on his shoulder. Feeling Jason's exhaustion caused by the high mana consumption his black origin flame required, she wanted to help him somehow, but there was no way to do so. But in his opinion, nothing bad happened, because he saw something miraculous in front of him, as the jadeite alloy released dense mana fluctuation, while they innately absorbed quite a lot of mana. This natural mana absorption caused the jadeite bar next to Shane to gleam in a distinct green color with silver lines in between, while the whole bar was sprinkled with star-like dots. The color he perceived from the bar next to Shane was a faint, light gray, which was the second lowest possible radiating color. However, Jason had never seen such a color radiating from any grade 1 weapon, which caused him to look at the bar in awe, while Shane was shaping the other portion. A few hours passed and Shane was finally done when Dahlia handed him a purple glowing mixture with an empty black pen that looked extremely exquisite and expensive as golden runes shimmered on it. Smiling lightly, Shane poured half of the purple glowing mixture into the empty pen, as he injected his mana into it, manifesting the golden shining runes. Jason wasn't sure what was about to happen, but he was sure that the black pen with golden runes couldn't be something ordinary, as the complex runes he saw released a mysterious pressure. It was as if these runes existed since ancient times, when Shane began to inscribe the first few runes on the 30 centimeters long dagger that looked like a wolf in a sheep's coat due to its beautiful appearance. The green, silver-lined starlight blade looked razor-sharp even though it was paper-thin, while Jason was sure that he could kill everything without much effort. Watching Shane's procedure, Jason was in awe, as he had never seen some of these runes, and he was sure that the inscription mixture Dahlia concocted was also nothing ordinary. Altogether, Jason was extremely shocked until he noticed a certain motion of Shane that seemed to be off. "Stop. Master. I think you have to be 1 to 2 millimeters higher in order to inscribe the rune right on the crossroad of mana veins," Jason shouted out, causing Dahlia to look at him weirdly before she turned to Shane, who was visibly embarrassed. He followed Jason's order and corrected his slight mistake that would have decreased the dagger's output by almost 10%, as the distinct crossroad of mana veins was the most important component of the dagger he inscribed right now. Clearing his throat, he confessed ashamedly, "It has been a long time since I tried to create a flawless mana grade 1 weapon with such faint mana veins within. Jason, you can help me with your mana eyes if. Tell me where exactly most mana veins are situated and where they overlap." Jason wasn't sure how much of a difference the thickness between grade 1 and grade 2 mana veins was, but without constant practicing, he was sure that losing the edge on perceiving feeble mana veins would happen quite easily. As such, he stepped forward and pointed out the most distinct and overlapping spots of mana veins while Shane inscribed the runes on the shown spots, without considering that Jason could have done something wrong. If Jason were to tell him a wrong spot, he would have to shoulder the consequences by himself, as the weapon's strength wouldn't be top-notch anymore. More than 30 minutes passed when Shane finished inscribing both daggers with all kinds of runes. Handing the finished product to Jason without any kind of celebration, he looked proud, yet with complex feelings at the youth in front of him. Shane never needed any help from someone younger than him in order to obtain the best results according to his estimation. However, in the last few dozen years, he didn't have much time to practice his forging skills, as they were hiding, while the times he forged were mostly used for high-grade items and weapons whose mana veins were easier to notice by him, not as weak and feeble as a grade 1 material. Jason didn't think much about Shane's small issue, as he could somehow understand that Shane couldn't sense extremely thin mana veins as good as a few dozen years ago, as he was more proficient with inscribing runes on higher-graded items and weapons. Holding the daggers in his hands, Jason felt immediately comfortable with the grip, as if they were perfectly accustomed to his demands. A radiant smile emerged on his face as he could barely hold back shouting out in joy when he injected his mana into them. The mana grade 1 jadeite daggers brightened up, while the purple runes on it gleamed vigorously, as Jason's mana decreased with an extremely fast pace. Controlling his mana consumption, the dagger's brightness increased or decreased when Jason heard a small humming sound, as if they wanted to talk to him. "What?" Jason thought, shocked as he felt the blades vibrating violently, causing him to inject more mana into them until they calmed down. It seemed as if the blades sharpened themselves with him injecting mana into them, as the reflection he could see became more and more detailed, without any visible flaw. "They're perfect," Jason mumbled as he injected his whole mana pool into the blade. In addition to the small unique mana sphere, he transferred some mana within the unique mana sphere bracelet into it, causing a white purplish film to envelope the daggers wholly. The daggers seemed to grow in size as the main straight dagger enlarged by more than 5 centimeters, while the curved dagger seemed to manifest a second blade. Trying to test out the maximum capabilities of his daggers, it felt like the required mana were extremely large because and multiple times the size of Jason's current mana pool. A whole mid-master rank mana pool. Jason estimated silently, as the mana jadeite daggers began to scream out with Aishing telling him that their limit. Inspecting the daggers with the lowest possible mana supply, he thought these daggers looked like emeralds streaming within the starlight, as silver lines streaked through the dense green color, giving them a magnificent touch. The higher his mana supply was, the grander the jadeite daggers looked like, and Jason was struck in awe, as a name appeared within his mind. Viridi Starstream. Quote. Chapter 193 Heaven's Hell 3rd Level by Hydesgrain. Jason was sure that his naming sense could be considered the worst of the worst, but somehow he felt that it was not a bad name for his daggers, and he smiled at them like a small child that received a toy to play around with. After he was done staring at it for a while, it was already after lunchtime, and the three of them decided to regenerate the used-up energy by eating a small meal, even though Shane and Dahlia didn't have to eat for several weeks or even months in order to survive. The mana they absorbed gave them more than enough energy to live healthy, without any issues, but this didn't mean they couldn't eat something delicious. While Dahlia prepared something for lunch, Jason decided to practice the Heaven's Hell technique once again, as he entered his soul world. Looking at his soul energy of 157.2 units, he smiled lightly, as he remembered something extremely important he forgot because his schedule was so loaded. Suddenly a thought struck him like a lightning bolt, as he thought about the Heaven's Hell technique. I can already practice the 3rd Heaven's Hell level! Exclamation mark. How could I forget that? He asked himself, lamenting about his stupidity because it could increase his soul energy even more than the 5 braid helix he currently used. Even if he was not sure how much of a difference it would be because he already used one of the highest possible 2nd level helixes, which gave him an increase of 0.8% per usage. But if the description of the Heaven's Hell manual weren't wrong, it had to be a beneficial increase, otherwise, nobody would practice the 3rd level and skip it completely. Thinking for a moment, even a difference of 0.1% would be a vast difference for Jason, because he would be able to have an increase of more than 0.3% thanks to his extremely fast soul energy reproduction process that was 4 times faster than the average soul had. Unfortunately, he could barely use his extraordinary fast replenishing speed to his advantage, because he practiced the Heaven's Hell technique 3 times a day, with each practice taking longer than an hour. If he were to do a continuous circle of his Heaven's Hell practice, as he wished to do, the real effect of his soul world's unique replenishing effect could be showcased. But until he could even think of doing something like this, he had to increase his soul energy to a much higher degree while the creation of his 2nd sub-area was still far away. Jason didn't want to endure such torture ever again, like it was the case with his 1st sub-area, and finding enough resources for his currently 2 soul bonds alone was already problematic enough. He couldn't even provide himself with a high number of mana stones or magical treasures that could enhance his physique, mana absorption rate, or anything like that. As such, the plan to create a 2nd sub-area with the mind-splitting technique he had, in addition to developing a continuous circle to use the reproduced soul energy immediately after it was expelled, were thrown back into a corner of his mind. When the time comes, he would come back to this idea, but not now. Having already read through the whole Heaven's Hell techniques manual, Jason knew what he had to do now. Considering that he had already practiced the Heaven's Hell 5 braid helix for quite some time, and even 3 times a day at that, Jason was extremely confident in his focus and soul energy control that was superior to a few weeks ago. As such, the easiest structure of the Heaven's Hell 3rd level should be easily accomplished by him without much pressure, as he remembered that the 3rd level was called Drill. The reason was simple, and it was to create a drill that would form a tiny hole inside the soul world core only to inject the soul energy. Because the soul world core had to regenerate the damage caused by the drill, it had to use up a lot of Jason's energy while strengthening the soul world core's muscle. Even though his energy consumption would increase because of that, Jason was confident in negating this effect by eating a massive quantity of food, or maybe just some qualitative food, which would cost him a fortune. The nutrition would be converted into a mysterious energy thanks to the unknown and primordial-looking runes inscribed on his soul world core, and humanity didn't even know how it worked or why this process happened. Jason was curious about his soul world core, and even more so about the runes carved into it, but he couldn't just take it out in order to inspect it with his mana eyes, unfortunately. In the end, he could only follow the descriptions from the Heaven's Hell technique because he received many benefits from it. He was not really a fan of following anyone or anything stupidly without asking how it worked, but with his shallow knowledge, there was no way to figure out how exactly his own body worked, while humanity as a whole didn't know anything useful about the Soul World Core at all. The only thing they were sure of was that it saved humanity from their annihilation, and even if many theories about the Soul World Core were published, proving them could only be described as extremely difficult. Creating a drill with his soul energy threads wasn't really difficult, but the real challenge came when Jason had to rotate the combined soul energy threads in order to create a working and sharp tip with which he wanted to pierce into his own soul world core. Why am I even doing something as stupid as this? He lamented in his mind, as he patiently constructed the unmoving, thin drill without making it too broad in order to reduce the damage and pain he had to endure. Rotating it with all his willpower focused on it, the drill moved violently, trembling as it approached his soul world core before a screeching sound could be heard when it pierced in the soul world core's outer layer, exactly at the position he aimed for. In order to minimize the damage, Jason looked for the area with the fewest primordial runes as he pierced into it, causing a sting in his head that slowly spread through his whole body. Goosebumps covered his skin, but the pain was less than he initially thought, as the 5-braid helix seemed to have hurt more when he injected it into his soul world core the first time. Finishing the process smoothly, Jason was confused as it seemed way too easy. While the most difficult step should have been the rotating process, he mastered it relatively smooth thanks to his high soul energy control. However, only after finishing the process, as he left the soul world, overwhelming fatigue enveloped Jason's whole body. With a growling stomach, Jason could barely stand up, as he dragged himself towards the kitchen, where Shane and Dahlia were silently preparing the meal. Noticing someone approaching them from behind, they immediately knew it was Jason because there couldn't be anyone else in their hideout. However, seeing Jason's weakened expression and hearing his grumbling stomach, their expression turned to confusion, before both of them laughed out loud, ignoring his pitiful situation completely. "Please, give me some food. I'm so hungry," Jason could only say, as his legs gave in, without the strength to come back up once again. Chapter 194. Are you ready? By Hydesgrain. Jason saw multiple different dishes on the table when he finally gathered his strength to lift his body in order to sit down on the chair in front of him. He would have never believed that the Heaven's Hell's third level wouldn't be painful but rather extremely energy-consuming, requiring an astronomical amount of nutrition which were converted into energy at that. In order to compensate for this, he knew for sure that the previous rather scarce amount of food he normally ate wouldn't be enough. All dishes radiated a large amount of mana, and when the three started to eat, Jason felt his energy replenishing extremely fast, while the mana entering his body circulated vigorously in his mana veins. Not only was the food delicious but also extremely beneficial for him. As such, he ate for half an hour without saying anything until his stomach felt as if it would explode any moment. Satisfied with the result, Jason wanted to stand up in order to wash the dishes, as Shane used his mana to lift the plates and clean them with a single motion before they were magically placed into the shelf. Not knowing what exactly he should do now, Jason messaged Malia to tell him when their journey into the 4-star rift would begin. He didn't receive an immediate answer, and it was most likely because she was still in school, attending her practical class. As such, Jason had to think of other ways to figure out what he could do in order to be perfectly prepared. Shane and Dahlia gave him several advices which he wanted to use to be fully prepared, as he opened the holographic screen of his quantum bracelet in order to search for multiple items. In the beginning, he wanted to purchase a mana grade 1 bow with tempered high mana conductivity arrows, but he wouldn't be able to kill unblemished beasts like this, forcing him to disregard this plan immediately. As for soul weapons, Jason decided to ignore purchasing such things, because he wanted to make them by himself for a much cheaper price, as he would be fully aware of his soul weapon armor's capabilities, while a soul weapon that adjusted itself to Jason's current strength was not something he needed. In the end, he just purchased a mountain of preservable dishes, which he would throw into the preserving section of his storage device, while the most important purchases he made were made for Scorpio and Artemis in order to feed them nutritious food. A few weeks ago, he forced Artemis to eat the remaining wild and awakened beast cores he purchased weeks ago, only to receive a deprecating gaze, even though she listened to him. Jason figured out that she wouldn't be satisfied with any incomplete mana cores below the unblemished rank. While Ice Elemental Magical ranked complete mana cores were her loved and favorite delicacy, she could digest without being forced to enter hibernation to digest everything. Purchasing a bunch of magical ranked mana cores and many different kinds of poisoned meat for Scorpio were his preparations for his Soulbond's food. He wasn't sure what exactly happened with Scorpio, but after he underwent the incomplete evolution, he wanted to improve his poison affinity and demanded poisonous meat to eat, which caused him to feel weird, yet extremely proud, because his Soulbond was adamant in becoming stronger. Scorpio is not capable of communicating with him in human language, but their fortified soul conjunction enabled Jason to understand everything his second Soulbond wanted to tell him. This ability was extremely beneficial, and he wondered when Artemis would finish her fortified soul conjunction because they were already together for a few months while he raised her up from the moment she hatched as one of the weakest possible wild-ranked beasts to the present. However, Jason had the bad premonition that Artemis would always nag with him, only that he would finally understand her once their fortified soul conjunction was established, which was not really something he looked forward to. In the end, he was extremely impatient with her forming a fortified soul conjunction only after being together for several months, while others required several dozen years to do the same as he did with Scorpio in a short period. Nevertheless, Jason was rather excited because he wanted to test so many things out. When he was done with his purchase for his Soulbond's food, and other miscellaneous items, Jason looked out for a better mana gun that he wanted to purchase in order to protect himself at least slightly once they ventured into the 4-star rift. Thanks to the unique Mana Sphere bracelet Shane gifted him, Jason would be able to supply more than enough mana in order to fire a Grade 2 gun, several hundred times without issue. The only small problem he registered was the immense recoil Grade 2 guns had, which could even shatter his shoulder if he were to purchase a gun he couldn't handle. As such, Jason had to search for a pistol without much recoil, while it should still be powerful enough to use armor-piercing and other types of bullets, allowing him to kill unblemished beasts. Time passed slowly, as Shane and Dahlia decided to retreat in order to let him alone when he finally found something interesting. Mana Grade 2574 magazines, price. 1-star note, 100 million credits, only for today! Exclamation mark. Sighing deeply, Jason knew that the price was rather high, compared to other Grade 2 weapons. However, being able to construct a Grade 2 mana gun without much recoil was mostly bow for the younger generation in order to protect themselves. As such, Jason had to bear with the price, as he paid 1.2-star notes for the pistol with a large variety of bullets. Sighing deeply, he told himself that he had to search for a bunch of treasures in order to compensate for his expenditures today. The food he purchased for himself, Scorpio, and Artemis were already worth 1-star note, while Artemis' portion was the most expensive, due to her high demand. In the end, in addition to the miscellaneous items, food expenditures and the Grade 2 mana operated 5/7 Jason purchased was worth 10-star notes, with the miscellaneous items being the most expensive with 8-star notes. From his whole fortune, this was less than 5%, but Jason didn't have a stable income for now, and because of that, he wanted to act more economically. But his life was more important, and if Shane or Dahlia didn't gift him such precious treasures like the unique Mana Grade 1 daggers, potions, and high-quality Mana Grade 2 leather armor, Jason's expenses would be graver. It was already 5 p.m. when he finished everything, as he ordered the parcel to arrive the Flay's home, where he would go now. He still wanted to discuss with Malia what exactly was going on now and when they would enter the 4-star rift when he received a message from her. The rift will be completely materialized tomorrow and we'll be able to enter it on Friday. Come home first and we'll talk about the rest later, okay? Reading her messages, he was already expectant what would happen in the next few weeks, as Shane teleported him out of their hideout. It was Friday morning when Jason and Malia were impatiently gulping down the breakfast. While a single plate with a toast and a sausage could be seen in front of Malia, Jason devoured one plate after another with a satisfied expression, causing her to unintentionally laugh out. Releasing her tension, Greg could be seen walking down the stairs, as he stared daggers at them because they would leave him alone. Not even his parents were at home, which annoyed him a lot. When he heard that Jason was allowed to join his sister's expedition team, he wanted to join too, only to be immediately rejected, which felt like a heavy slap. In the beginning, Greg couldn't understand his sister's reason until he was almost forced to acknowledge that his best friend's ability was just too beneficial. Sighing deeply, Greg couldn't do anything against the decision, when he stared at Jason, who seemed to be extremely calm on the outside as he gobbled down his breakfast. "Jason, why are you eating so much since the last few days? Are you scared to enter your first rift?" He tried to tease, as Malia looked worried to Jason, thinking that he might disguise his insecurity by eating so much over the last few days. "Are you ready?" she asked hesitantly, only to receive a slight nod from Jason, when he finished his meal. Chapter 195 Is This Rift a Single? By Hydesgrain. Over the last few days, Jason tried to improve his combat prowess as well as possible, while practicing the Heaven's Hell 3rd level which ravished most of his energy, he had to replenish. Scorpio and Artemis' demand for soul energy increased once again, causing Jason to frown, even though it should be seen as a good sign. On one side it was definitely an advantage because higher soul energy indicated that their innate strength increased, while the negligible disadvantage was Artemis, who Jason couldn't store within his soul world. His soul energy reached 185 units, while Artemis' demand increased from 140 to 155 units. Scorpio annexed 10 more units, totaling his soul energy demand to 70 units, and the Black Origin Flame was still desiring Jason's soul energy with its measly 0.01 unit without being allowed to take any. Due to his exponential increase in soul energy Jason received, he was confident to take over the demanded soul energy from his soul bonds, if he had enough time. Right now he was merely 40.01 soul energy units away from his goal. Jason looked at Malia with confidence, without showing any sign of worries, while Malia seemed a little bit hesitant about her expedition into an unknown 4-star rift that barely opened for the public. The public didn't really know anything about the 4-star rift, but what she got to know from her teachers shocked her a little bit. Because the principal knew that Jason and other promising students requested an absence of leave from school due to their mandatory expedition, Old Drake decided to hand out an information sheet to all teams. As such, Malia and her team were already aware of what they would have to face after entering the rift. On one side it was shocking, while on the other side, it was something they had never heard before, which ignited a deep sense of curiosity within them. Jason was unaware of the information sheet due to Malia's negligence, but it wouldn't really change anything for him. In the end, his expectations couldn't be any higher than they already were, and he felt like a small child waiting to receive candies. Rather than worrying needlessly, Jason tested out everything with the Viridi Starstream daggers, which felt like they were extensions of his body. Due to this new sensation he received from his daggers, martial art techniques improved by leaps and bounds, which astonished him a lot. He didn't reach a higher mastery, but his moves became smoother, while his mana circulation in accordance with the daggers felt much easier than it already was. Over the last few days, Shane and Dahlia used their whole mana to fill his unique mana sphere bracelet to the brim, shocking both Artemis and Jason extremely. If he were able to use this mana for himself, Jason wouldn't have the need for mana stones until he would reach the master rank at the bare minimum, while Artemis' desire to absorb his bracelet increased more with each day passing. Even though he didn't doubt Artemis' ability to absorb strangers' mana at all, but Jason didn't want to test it right now, as he would need the mana for himself. Furthermore, he didn't want Artemis to take a long hibernation once again, while he had to fight for himself in order to sustain his soulbond's luxurious life. When they finished their breakfast, the two of them washed up, before Malia summoned her nightmare horse that was still at the unblemished rank, gazing at Jason with disgust. "What have I done to you?" he thought in his mind, as Malia told him to sit behind her. The nightmare horse didn't seem to like this, but she had to obey Malia thanks to the soulbond. Jumping on the horse's back, Jason felt a burning sensation immediately below him as it ignited a small flame, where he sat. It hurt only for a moment until Malia noticed his pained expression, as she laughed out. Stop teasing him, all right. Malia said, chuckling before they began the short journey through the city. Not even 20 minutes passed until they entered the devastated area where rubble and destroyed skyscrapers could still be seen all over the place. Jason held Malia's waist firmly in order to stay safe on the nightmare horse's back, with his mana eyes activated, gazing straight towards the large ring-shaped compressed mana that released distinct golden, black and silver colors. From further away, he couldn't really detect anything at all, but the closer they came, the more detailed the colors turned out, causing him to look shocked at what he saw. Previously, he thought the golden, black, and silver colors might have been certain elements, causing the rift to materialize. Apparently, this was not essentially wrong, but the most important fact he could roughly assume was what caused these elements to suddenly appear, which created the rift. If his mana eyes didn't play him any tricks, he could faintly perceive all kinds of mysterious, complex runes around the ring-shaped rift, that were connected with each other. Can only I see them? Jason asked himself, as he could finally see the rift with his bare eyes once buildings didn't obstruct his view anymore. However, thinking for a moment, he figured out that others might not be able to see them, because he himself couldn't see them, once he suppressed his mana eyes to the bare minimum. These runes shone in a black, golden, and silver color, but they were completely different compared to normal runes, due to multiple reasons. The runes were the most complex ones he had ever seen, and one had to say that Jason saw many complex runes inside Shane's forging room. If Shane labeled a pseudo-mana grade 3 anvil as average, he had to have a better one, and in Jason's opinion, his master had either a pseudo-mana grade 4 anvil or a normal grade 4 anvil, from what his mana eyes told him. As such, Jason was aware of what grade 4 runes looked like. However, they seemed to become child's play against the terrifying and profound pressure he perceived from the runes, only he could see. Malia was unaware of Jason's shock, as her only thoughts were focused on him holding her waist firmly, causing her to blush, even though she didn't want to. However, the closer they came to the rift, the more hesitant she became, as the mana density and pressure began to overwhelm her, while her thoughts changed. Looking back, she noticed Jason staring straight at the rift, with shock, fear, and curiosity gleaming in him, as she figured out that he most likely used his mana eyes to inspect the rift thoroughly. Once they arrived at the security check that was more than 1 kilometer away from the rift, they stopped and descended from the nightmare horse that returned into Malia's soul world, after it glared at Jason fiercely. However, Jason didn't even notice this, as his focus didn't leave the rift for a single moment, due to the profoundness of the runes he perceived. Are these runes inscribed out of transmuted mana, or has the world gathered particular mana particles something to do with this? Jason wasn't sure about that, but it seemed like the runes were made by someone or something, because they were accurately lined up and connected with each other, and he began to doubt that their Argos, their planet, could do something like this. Is this normal? When he noticed that he had to verify his identity, Jason was thrown out of his thoughts and he finished everything as fast as he could. Once done, Malia led him to her team while Jason tried to burn at least one profound rune into his mind. However, this feat alone was already extremely difficult, due to the hundreds of connected affinity transmuted mana strings that were thick, thin, long, short, intertwined with each other, and sometimes even fused with the other affinity runes. Is this rift a single rune? He almost shouted out in shock, as Malia dragged him out of his thoughts. We're there. She whispered, a little bit annoyed about Jason spacing out all the time. Chapter 196, Queasy Feeling by Hydesgrain. Dragged out of his thoughts, Jason looked around, only to see the dear siblings waiting for them. Next to them stood two other youths who looked proud and visibly annoyed because they had to wait for him and Malia. Both youths were roughly as tall as he was, with a height of slightly more than 1.7 meters, while one of the youths was even smaller than him. The smaller student had thin eyes, a slightly brown-yellowish skin color, while his hair was black. Staring at Jason with his brown eyes, he didn't know where exactly he should look. Jason had never seen anyone with such a skin color, as almost all citizens on Asterix had rather fair skin, not like the small youth in front of him. However, With his facial features, it didn't look bad, and Jason smiled at the youth, trying to make a good first impression before he averted his gaze to the taller youth whose hair was also black while his eyes looked extremely eerie due to their brown, almost black color. The taller youth's facial features were nothing special, while his skin was pale, almost paper white, and could be ranked as average or maybe slightly above average at most. Malia greeted everyone before she started to introduce every team member to Jason and vice versa. While the taller, almost black-eyed youth's name was Lux July, the smaller youth's name was Lin Yoa. After everyone got to know each other, Malia's team started to explain everything to him, while Jason was still scanning through everyone's mana core once again in order to figure out the team's rough combat prowess. While the dear siblings had roughly a mana core size of a 4th master rank, Theo's was slightly larger. Lin had the weakest mana core at the 1st master rank, while his soul bond seemed to amplify it to the 3rd master rank, which indicates that his soul bond is at least at the mid unblemished rank, if not at the later unblemished rank, considering that he only contracted one soul bond, with a high amplification from his soul world core. Lin's mana was transmuted into a lush green-brownish mixture which was typical for wood and nature affinities, that were rather rare. As such, Jason concluded that he contracted some sort of sentient, plant, tree, or something similar, like Dahlia did, while Jason wasn't sure what kind of beast it was. Malia was still at the 2nd master rank, but due to her having contracted 2 soul bonds at a high rank, she had the 2nd largest mana core size of all 4 of them. However, Lux July was a huge contrast to the 4 of them, causing Jason to feel extremely uncomfortable when he inspected his mana core. According to his mana core, he was at the 3rd master rank, while his mana core size reached the 6th master rank, which was already extremely strong and would indicate that Lux contracted a magical ranked beast. However, thanks to Jason's exceptional eyesight, his mana eyes could identify that Lux's mana had multiple different transmutations, while all of them belonged to the same branch, causing goosebumps to cover him unintentionally. He had only once felt such a transmuted mana, and it was Shane's. Even though his master's transmutation was much denser, it was the transmutation his master's Death Knight caused. Lux had a darkness affinity, or rather it seemed like he only possessed a death affinity, which was a branch of the darkness affinity. This caused Jason to pity Lux slightly. However, this was most likely not needed, because he seemed to do well even without any other affinity, because he contracted multiple death affinity beasts already, indicating a large soul world, while his soul energy had to be equally high. However, the feeling Jason got about Lux was weird, and staring at him was even more uncomfortable, as if he was looking at something dead yet alive. He wasn't sure how to describe his thoughts, as Malia tugged at his clothes, dragging him back to the real world. "Did you even listen to our explanations? If you make a mistake it might kill all of us." Malia lectured him, as Jason apologized, causing the others to frown. Lux, however, noticed Jason's gaze with interest as a small, yet eerie smile blossomed on his pale face. Summarizing everything important, Malia glared at him, forcing Jason to repeat everything she said, which he did unwillingly before they took out their weapons and other equipment they wanted to prepare before stepping through the rift, even though it was completely useless, as the rift was protected by the government. However, the youths felt better if they were fully prepared for everything, and Jason just decided to tag along. The rift was still a few hundred meters away from him, but it was better to be safe than sorry, as beasts from the other side of the temporary rift could also appear in front of them without anyone noticing. Once everyone was done with changing their stuff, Jason decided to take a look at the others, only to notice that not a single one of them used a mana weapon or armor, except himself. This attracted some attention because everyone could sense the mana fluctuations radiating from his daggers and leather armor. While Theo and Jennifer wondered why someone with such high-grade equipment had to venture into a dangerous 4-star rift while being at the adept rank in order to secure expensive treasures to evolve his soul bond, Lux and Lin labeled Jason as someone rich with the need of an adrenaline rush. However, the only one who was really astonished was Malia, as she seized Jason up from close before she whispered, "Where did you get this equipment? These things are extremely expensive. Weren't you poor when we first met? How?" But Jason just shrugged his shoulders, telling her that he obtained them legally and that he would tell her later after they returned from the 4-star rift. Malia could only lament in her mind, and she would remember Jason's word and nag him later. Artemis was still squeezed on his shoulder, attracting some attention from Jason's expedition team, but she remained silent, which led to the result that nobody said anything about her existence. Jason felt slightly uncomfortable because Artemis was the only summoned beast at the moment, as they suddenly stood in front of the rift, barely 100 meters away from it. Even though he felt uncomfortable with his soul bond as the only summoned beast, he couldn't help but praise the magnificent runes he perceived with his mana eyes. Jason couldn't understand them even a tiny bit, but he still tried to imprint them into his mind, which didn't seem to work well. This caused Jason to feel slightly dejected, as his surroundings began to attract quite a lot of mana from their surroundings, causing him to turn around. Looking down towards the ground, Jason estimated to see a total of 4 large magic circles in front of everyone. The only exception was Lux's 3 green whitish magic circle appeared in front of him, summoning bipedal, humanoid beasts, which immediately filled their surrounding with the stench of death. Damn, where did he get these beasts from? Jason asked himself, as the surrounding turned uncanny. Chapter 197 What the hell is going on? By Hydesgrain. While Jason was correct with his assumption about the dear siblings' soul bonds, as both of them summoned a peak-evolved ranked shadow panther with a dark green color radiating from them, Lynn summoned a 5-meter-tall tree ant whose roots, branches, and twigs were shaped into limbs in order to walk around freely. It looked somewhat hideous and crude but seemed to be efficient enough in order to walk around, even though it was slow. Malia only summoned her nightmare horse, without even thinking about summoning her water fairy, but this did not change the surrounding atmosphere. Lux's soul bonds were the reason for him to feel uncomfortable, and even the other expedition members felt slightly uneasy. This was mainly because Lux summoned 3 unblemished ranked skeletons with blue flames burning in their eye sockets, as they released their eerie death affinity without restraining it a tiny bit. Through his mana eyes, Jason could tell that they reached the potential limit, but everything about the skeletons felt weird. While one was a skeleton warrior, with a broadsword in its hand, another one was an elite skeleton archer, while the last one seemed to be a skeleton assassin with a smaller build. However, all of them looked like human skeletons, which was the cause for him to feel so uncomfortable. The radiating death mana wasn't the real cause for him to feel weird and awkward, but because he knew how skeletons were created thanks to his master's knowledge. Did he create them by himself, or are the skeletons from rifts with an innate death domain? Jason asked himself, knowing that creating a human undead was only possible by using a corpse whose soul has yet to leave its body. Sealing the soul and using certain magical ingredients, one could create a skeleton, without any intelligence and memories about their past. Jason's knowledge was not perfect, but he remembered that strengthening or evolving such skeletons was not possible because the mana core would stagnate once the owner died. As such, Lux's 3 skeletons were all undead humans at the master rank, which caused him to shudder. Everyone noticed that, and the others could only smile sadly because their first time with Lux's soul bonds was even more uncomfortable. They were also somewhat disgusted about Lux's decision to form a soul bond with former humans whose soul had been sealed within their mana core, but they could hardly do anything against it. Lux didn't care if anyone had prejudices against him, and they were free to think whatever they wanted about his soul bonds. It was his own business what soul bonds he would form a contract with and not anyone else's. If he wanted to survive, he would have to form a soul bond with a beast that had a death affinity, and only thanks to his family's utmost efforts was he able to receive a few skeleton from a death domain. Human skeletons weren't per se the best choice, but they were the strongest beasts he obtained, causing him to bind them even though he was looked at like a psychopath. In the end, he would do anything in order to become stronger, without caring what others thought about him, even if he had to socialize to a certain degree in order to graduate from school, as the expedition was mandatory for everyone. It was not really difficult to remain friendly with others, however, this changed almost immediately once they figured out what his soul bonds were. Without bothering about anyone, he just wanted to become stronger in order to reign over himself and not some big clans, who valued their citizen less than some magical treasures. When Jason saw the other members' pitying gaze towards him and slight disgust disguised behind, he understood that they already knew about Lux's soul bonds. As such, he could faintly comprehend that the black-eyed youth probably didn't do anything wrong, as he convinced himself that Lux received the skeletons from a death domain, even if he wasn't sure about the truth. In the end, Jason didn't dare to ask, because he felt uncomfortable doing so. If Lux did something wrong, the government should already know about it, probably. Malia sensed the whole situation turning awkward when she said, "Let's go earn some credits. We have no time to waste," while trying to sound euphoric. Nodding their head, they began to approach the rift with their 8 soul bonds next to them. There were still a few demolished constructions in their way until they were finally able to see the rift complete, causing everyone to marvel at its sheer size. Jason was still bewitched by the seemingly invisible runes within the blue shining liquid, but his attention was drawn to the hundreds of students and young men and women at the master rank, standing in a queue waiting for their turn to venture into the rift. So many want to enter the rift. Will we even obtain anything at all, if the numbers increase further? Jennifer said with worry when they noticed that some young men and women were already at the peak of the master rank with their late unblemished soul bonds next to them. The others were also confused because they never ventured into a newly materialized rift and didn't expect such a massive crowd of people trying to become rich. Some of them already ventured into a permanent low-star rift, but it was not even closely comparable to the current situation, which also astonished Jason. However, his astonishment was not devoted to the mass of humans, but rather their soul bonds, as many rare beasts were among them, even though their potential seemed to be used up. From canines to felines, flying beasts, snakes, bison to spirits, elementals, velociraptors, and much more, every kind of beast seemed to pop up in his view, causing Jason to imprint their affinities, individual mana channel distribution, and potential in his mind. More than an hour passed until they were barely halfway through their queue, while Jason completely forgot about the queasy feeling he had about Lux, as his soul bonds were rather ordinary compared to some other unique ones he observed. He wasn't even aware that so many different kinds of beasts existed on Asterix, and Jason kept wondering if some of them were imported from other islands or even Canir. It felt like a new world opened up to him, and everything was somehow thanks to the materializing rift which released thick mana currents, suppressing its surrounding. From his detailed research about all beasts he saw, Jason could tell that there wasn't yet a single magical ranked beast until now, while peak unblemished ranked beasts seemed to be more ordinary, and the reason for this was quite simple in his opinion. While it was already extremely difficult for humans to compress their mana into the first liquefied mana drop, the same applied for beasts, only that they had to follow their instincts to do something like that. As such, it was even said that some beasts with a potential allowing them to barely enter the magical rank, wouldn't necessarily mean that they would ever reach this rank. In the end, Jason felt rather disappointed that he didn't see any magical ranked beast, which was only because he wanted to observe if the rift's restriction would repel it or not. Normally that should be the case, but within the soul world, everything could change, and Jason was curious to figure that out. Nevertheless, until it was their turn, he couldn't see a single magical ranked beast could, and he immediately felt disappointed as he approached the rift. Sensing the pressure descending on him, Jason felt as if he was about to suffocate when he enveloped himself with a small membrane of mana. The guards that protected the city and the rift at the same time eyed him weirdly, wondering why an adept rank would venture into a 4-star rift, which distracted them from the duty. Jason didn't care about being eyed like this anymore, because almost everyone during the whole interval before they entered the rift's proximity eyed him like he was suicidal or extremely stupid. Everyone took a deep breath before they crossed the rift, and it felt like space twisted around them when everything went black around them. Meanwhile, Jason felt like Shane used his spatial teleportation with the addition of an unimaginable weird and uncomfortable, yet interesting feeling as time and space in front of him twisted. Through his mana eyes, he saw the black color representing an unknown affinity, the golden color indicating the space affinity, and the silver color which most likely represented time-transmuted mana swirling around them, while everyone around him collapsed. What the hell is going on? Single quote. Chapter 198 Ancient Ruins. By Hydesgrain. Jason was still fully awake, while his golden eyes shimmered within the seemingly endless darkness, preventing him from collapsing on the ground with an unknown yet unyielding will he never felt before. Forced to stay awake, the only thing he could do was to reassure that his comrades were still alive, which was the case according to the flickering mana fluctuations he perceived. But even if that was the case, Jason was unsure what exactly happened to him, when the eternal darkness vanished, with thousands of bright shining stars emerging in his surroundings. Without knowing, goosebumps covered his whole body and he even forgot to breathe by the sight in front of him. The stars next to him vanished as soon as the group crossed them, and Jason wondered if their speed was too fast, as he saw that they passed a terrifying humongous blue planet, while feeling that something about the planet was familiar. Is that mana? Jason was shocked, as had never felt such strong mana fluctuations from Argos, even though he was much closer to its core when he stood on the ground, compared to the blue planet that was an unknown, yet long distance away from him. What is going on here? He wondered as his golden eyes began to lose their luster once they crossed the huge planet, causing him to collapse next to his comrades. Nobody knew how much time passed when all of them regained their consciousness, laying inside a small tent, while one of them seemed to be absent. Jason awoke at first, but the things he saw before shocked him extremely, as he began to question everything he previously thought to know. What exactly are rifts? Where do they bring us, and what the hell was this tremendous large planet? The more time passed, the fewer answers he obtained, while even more questions appeared in his mind. It doesn't seem like anyone else saw the same things as I did, right? Not even Shane told me about the millions of stars and the huge blue planet within this transportation tunnel. He didn't even tell me anything about the runes stabilizing the rift, as if he is incapable to see them. Did the foreign races create them, or are they accidentally manifested? What about the blue planet? Do the foreign races know about it, or is that also something they don't know about? Jason understood that he didn't understand anything at all, which was extremely unpleasant, souring his mood. After the group was thrown out of the 4-star rift, they were brought into the infirmary by the government workers on the other side of the rift in order to look after them and if necessary supply them with IVs and other medicaments. Once it was clear that nothing went wrong with their transportation to the other side of the rift, their expedition group was transferred into a small tent. Not long after they were moved, Jason woke up. When he couldn't take the torture his mind created as he was unable to answer the questions, Jason went outside the tent. While Malia and her classmates knew where they would land, Jason was still not sure where exactly the 4-star rift brought them. With his mana eyes constantly activated, he already figured out that the mana in their surroundings was much higher than inside Syro City, which was thinned out because of the dome's high mana demand. If his estimation was correct, they were currently inside an area that had a mana density comparable to a common 4-star wild zone, causing his passive mana absorbing technique to hasten up. With his current passive absorption speed, Jason was confident to reach the 4th adept rank in 10 days without actively absorbing any mana at all, causing him to smile lightly. How fast would my ranks improve inside the blue planet? He asked himself, sighing deeply as he looked around with interest gleaming in his eyes. It was cold where they were, and from his perspective, their own and many other tents had to be built on a highland plateau. Behind them was a large mountain, piercing through the clouds, while Jason noticed that the rift was in front of the hillside, barely on the highland plateau. If the rift manifested a few meters behind, it would have been inside the hillside, which would create many unforeseen difficulties for everyone venturing into it. Walking around, Jason suddenly heard a familiar screeching behind him, with Artemis struggling to fly towards him, as he sighed slightly, patiently waiting for her. Artemis never left him since she finished her evolution, which was not really advantageous in Jason's opinion because they fought every time he wanted to take a shower or go to the toilet. Forcing her to stay out of the bathroom was difficult, but Jason didn't want to be eyed the whole time while enduring her nagging was acceptable for him in exchange for some peace. During their journey through the rift, she also lost her consciousness, however, because Jason's soul energy was too small, she wasn't forcefully sent back into his soul world like it happened with the other expedition members' soul bonds. From this fact and the obvious fact that not only their expedition group but all humans summoned their soul bonds, which were most likely also forcefully sent back to their master's soul world, he could decipher that this 4-star rift they entered was definitely nothing ordinary. Otherwise, why would everyone waste their time and energy in order to summon their soul bonds before they entered the rift only for them to collapse and be forcefully sent back? Does that mean losing consciousness is not a common occurrence during a teleportation through the rift? Jason wondered, but his brain was still filled with other questions, causing him to disregard everything, as Artemis dived towards his shoulder, where she landed, only to rub her head at Jason's. Everything about the current situation was weird, but it seemed like the government didn't care about it, which also meant that it was most likely not as uncommon as he thought. Shrugging his shoulder, Jason told himself that it might be because of the restriction as he couldn't think of another reason. His current knowledge. This would not explain the reason for him to stay conscious during the teleportation and the existence of the colossal blue planet, but his shallow answer was better than nothing at all. Walking towards the other side of the rift, he noticed that the highland plateau, that was situated on a mountain ring, surrounded a huge valley with lush trees piercing through the clouds, covering smaller trees, while a large sky-blue gleaming cascade could be seen on his right, creating a large river within the valley, flowing through a complex of multiple magnificent buildings. Wait. Right as Jason was about to continue to look through the valley, which seemed to be filled with extremely dense mana, he noticed that something was off. In the center of the valley, he could clearly perceive an astronomical amount of mana, while magnificent building complexes made out of an unknown material pierced through the ground, attracting his attention, even though they were covered by different trees. Are these ancient ruins? Jason wondered as he remembered many documents about rifts, saying something about extinct intelligent races, allowing humanity to use their intact remains to develop their technology worth hundreds of years further ahead. At the same time, some big families and clans received, blessed, martial art techniques from ancient ruins, which was the reason for their strength to soar. Smiling brightly, Jason wasn't disappointed with what he saw, as his golden eyes gleamed brightly. Chapter 199 Safe versus Risk by Hydesgrain. Even though Jason was unsure if the valley and the surrounding mountain ring were only a small dimension, something similar like that, or if there was something behind the mountain ring, he couldn't help but be amazed by what he saw. The mana density he saw while looking down from the plateau was thick and looked like it was stored within the valley. From the high mana concentrated valley center area towards the outskirts, it was easy for Jason to perceive that even the outskirts had a mana density comparable to normal 4-star wild zones. Within the center, Jason saw magnificent yet obsolescent building complexes which were labeled as ancient ruins. As such, it was most likely the place with most treasures, as long as the ruins were not completely looted. Even a single advanced mana device might help humanity to develop their technology further and was as such extremely valuable. However, the only issue Jason and the other members had to face would be quite difficult to overcome. Not only would the competition with all other humans be high, with some young men and women at the peak master rank infinitely close to compressing their first drop of liquefied mana, but even more problematic would be the magical ranked beasts. If his prediction was not wrong, the whole central area had to be the habitat of hundreds if not several thousand magical ranked beasts, which was even rare to have on Asterix. Jason couldn't be sure of this fact, but due to the mana density he barely saw in the central area that was dozens of kilometers away from him, told him so. In the end, his mana eyes could only barely perceive the mana fluctuation so far away because of his elevated position, with nothing with mana fluctuations obstructing his sight, as it would blur everything behind. As such, it was possible, and the only problem he told himself was that he had to convince his teammates to disregard the existence of the ancient ruins for the time being. It would be useless for them to sacrifice their time and most likely even their life in order to obtain nothing due to the high competition. Their plateau was protected by many soldiers at the peak of the master rank while they installed many traps and a long-range mana fluctuation radar in order to prevent any kinds of incidents. Artemis could fly around because she was not detected by the long-range mana fluctuation radar due to her being a soulbond, but some ambitious hunter might see her as a rare beast and try to shoot her down, which Jason wanted to prevent. Forced to stay squeezed on Jason's shoulder, Artemis wasn't sure if she should feel happy or not, because she wanted to fly around freely as the mana fluctuations she sensed and absorbed caused her to be more energetic. A full hour passed and Jason was still seizing up the whole valley, trying to figure out a good location for them to venture first, as he noticed that someone approached him from behind. Turning around, he saw Malia and the rest of the expedition team, who were still pale, looking at him with curiosity and astonishment. "What is your trick be so sturdy at your mana core rank? How long have you been unconscious?" Theo asked, astonished about Jason's well-being. When they woke up, all of them thought that Jason was still in the infirmary because of a possible injury, because their own head felt as if it would explode any moment. But when they arrived at the infirmary, they couldn't see him, which caused Malia to panic for a moment, when one of the protectors remembered Jason because of his golden eyes and low mana core rank. Seeing that Jason was fine, looking down into the valley as if nothing happened, Malia was relieved, while the others weren't sure if they should be glad or jealous. Lux didn't really care about Jason's well-being and was considered the strongest out of their team, which was the cause for him to feel the lightest headache, but even if that was the case, seeing that Jason, who was 2 whole stages below him, completely fine was not something he should underestimate. Noting that Jason was an extraordinary, yet interesting irregular, Lux decided to observe Jason for the time being. "I don't know when I woke up, but it has probably been, like an hour or so. Have you guys seen the ancient ruins?" Jason answered honestly, but he wasn't aware that everyone except him already knew about the ancient ruins. As such, he was disappointed with their reaction when Malia said, "We already knew about the ancient ruins from before, but I don't really think we should waste our time venturing into the center." Hearing this, Jason nodded his head in approval, when he noticed Jennifer and Lynn shaking their head. "If we find an unknown mana device, we can earn tens of thousands star notes, as long as it's working to a certain extent." Exclamation mark. With a high-technology mana device, it might even be hundreds of thousands star notes. "Shouldn't we at least give the ancient ruins a try?" Lynn said with excitement in his eyes, which caused Jason to feel slightly astonished. I expected Jennifer to be impatient, naive, and maybe greedy, but Lynn is the same. Exclamation mark. This was unexpected, but Jennifer agreed to what Lynn said, causing the group to end up in a controversial opinion. While he and Malia wanted to be safe, Lynn and Jennifer seemed to like taking a risky, almost suicidal path, as long as they obtain a vast fortune. Lux and Theo remained silent, but Jason got the feeling that Theo was more on their side because he seemed to be a rather careful guy. However, Lux was labeled as irregular in Jason's opinion, and even looking at him felt still somewhat uncomfortable, even though he tried to tell himself that the black-eyed youth received his soul bonds from a death domain. In the end, Lux felt unapproachable and distant, as if he didn't care about any worldly matter, which was completely different from Jason's way of thinking. He didn't say anything at all, and only when Theo stated his opinion, Lux decided to adjust himself, agreeing. It's too dangerous to venture into the central area of the valley where the ancient ruins are situated. There are most likely many magical ranked beasts, and the competition amongst the others who also came with us through the 4-star rift is too large. Furthermore, it's not even assured that we can find something there. Let's descend and look out for treasures on the outskirts. We have a task to accomplish, if you guys didn't forget that already. Before they ventured into the 4-star rift, Jason figured out that Malia and her expedition team had to collect a sum of a few billion credits in order to accomplish their mission. In the end, the task allowed only beast corpses and magical treasures, ores, herbs, and so on, while prohibiting any lifestyle occupation to help out by forging, concocting, or inscribing runes. As such, they had to hunt treasures and beasts for the next few weeks. The other nodded, while Jason suddenly remembered an important piece of information they had to acquire. Clearing his throat, he asked his team, that was about to descend the Highland Plateau. "How many days will the rift even remain open, and how long should we remain here?" Quote. Chapter 200 First Encounter by Hydesgrain. After asking one of the government workers in charge, their small group found out that the rift would stay stable enough to venture through unhindered for approximately 25 more days. Once this period passed, it would turn unstable, with the forceful gathered mana slowly being released before it would dissipate. As such, the group decided to venture out for 20 days before they would come back with 5 days as a buffer if something were to happen. Descending the mountain, the Highland Plateau, they were currently at was situated, took a few hours, while it was a little bit strange that not a single beast could be seen by them. They didn't summon their soul bonds during that time, and only Artemis flew around, observing the whole situation, in order to reassure a safe trip towards the valley. Jason's Mana 5/7 was already holstered with armor-breaking bullets in his magazines, while his Viridi Starstream daggers were safely sheathed. In the beginning, he was pondering if he should sheath them in a scabbard or not, but Melia demonstrated to him that taking weapons out from the storage device took slightly longer than unsheathing them. This short interval could already decide over his life, which he didn't want to challenge. Potions and other items were still better protected within his storage device, but even if that was the case, Jason took out a few potions, which he placed into his customized belt for potions because of the same reason as his daggers. The throwing knives couldn't be used by him anymore because the grade was too low and he didn't have any time to make new ones. Even if he did, his throwing strength would have been too low to make a big difference. The same applied for a bow, and Jason decided to be a perfect tracker, while he would also rely on his dagger if necessary. Once they reached a less steep hillside, they could finally carefully enter the valley's outskirt, while the area around them turned from the grey stone field with a few lush bushes greener with a fresh and lush grass field greeting them. Life began to blossom, and the whole scenario around them changed once they entered the valley, with large trees, wide bushes, and the chirping from birds reaching them. Everyone except Lux summoned their soul bonds because they determined that it would be better not to attract too much commission for the time being. Death affinities were extremely rare, and most beasts weren't able to suppress their transmuted mana radiating from them, while exactly that was the case with the Lux's skeletons. Wild beasts would react completely differently when they sensed their soul bonds, compared to perceiving the mana fluctuations of undead beings, because most beasts would at first take care of these beasts as their priority, disregarding anything else in their surroundings. This had some reasons, but the most important was that death transmuted mana destroyed their surrounding landscape, turning it infertile. At the same time, every living being was innately hostile towards undead beings, causing even the most hated arch-enemies to create an alliance against the same innate enemy. In the end, Lux was extremely unlucky, even though his mana core size was the largest among the whole team, because he would never be able to freely handle his soul bonds without being regarded as the most hated enemy. Surrounding Jason, as the weakest in their expedition team, everyone unsheathed their weapons. While Jennifer used a peak grade 2 bow, Lynn used daggers and throwing knives. Theo used a peak grade 2 longsword, and Lux unsheathed 2 short swords that were only slightly larger than his long Viridi Starstream daggers. However, what astonished Jason was that Melia took out a wand from her storage device. Wands were always mana weapons, and from the mana fluctuations he saw, Jason was sure that it was a mana grade 1 wand that had to be extremely expensive. Wands were much more expensive than normal mana weapons because of their ability to amplify elemental attacks to a certain extent. With Melia's fire affinity at the unblemished rank and the water affinity at the peak of the evolved rank, she would be able to defeat a few unblemished beasts at once. Even a group of unblemished beasts shouldn't be much of a problem, as long as she had enough mana to sustain her elemental attacks. Why didn't she use the wand in Jiro City? Jason suddenly asked himself, but there could be multiple reasons to answer this. As such, he would ask later because they had more important things to do at the moment. As their tracker, he was supposed to tell the expedition group where to go, even though he wasn't exactly sure what his group wanted to do at first. Should we explore everything within a safe proximity or take a look at what beasts habitat in the more secured areas in order to walk around more freely to find more treasures? Jason asked in order to figure out what his team wanted. He was not the leader of the group, and upon looking closer, it seemed as if nobody leads the group, which was not really good. If they were in great danger, who knows what would happen, and without anyone's backbone holding everyone together, the whole group could end up separated. Jennifer looked at her brother, as if she wanted him to speak, while both Malia and Lynn behaved like they wanted to say something too. Let's do both at the same time. We can take a look at most beasts while exploring the outskirts, right? Lux, who didn't say a word previously, asked, and nobody wanted to rebuke him, due to the eerie feeling around him. Jason only nodded his head, as he told them which path they should follow before he roughly described what kinds of beasts he would perceive, or rather how many beasts were gathered in one spot with their mana core rank included. In addition, he could also tell his team their elemental affinity, but Jason didn't want to expose everything he could do at the moment. Most beasts would openly reveal their elemental affinity either from their fur, skin, hide color, or even before their fight began in order to intimidate their opponents. As such, it was unnecessary for Jason to reveal all his secrets, as they approached a small group of heavy armored mountain bears next to another group of green windwalker bears. These two groups lived in different small groups but weren't hostile to each other. Apparently, they even divided their meat with the other group, as Jason noticed them ripping apart a large 10-meter tall forest guardian at the peak unblemished rank. Jason had never seen any of these three races in front of him, but he was astonished to notice that the two bear groups that were at the low, mid-unblemished ranks were able to defeat a forest guardian at the peak unblemished rank. The forest guardian looked similar to a moose, which wondered Jason slightly because what he remembered about them was different, but the faint, almost completely dissipated mana fluctuations he saw were exactly what he read from a forest guardian that was said to be a bipedal beast. Nevertheless, the bear groups they approached would make a good harvest, either for their hide, claws, or even their organs to concoct special potions, which attracted everyone's attention. Suddenly, the nightmare horse's black flames flickered, attracting the attention of a certain bear, as it roared out, causing the remaining heavy armored mountain and windwalker bears to turn around. Glaring at each other, Jason wondered if his decision to venture into a 4-star rift was so smart, as he quickly unholstered his 5.7.